Stephen Dunbar Johnson. I'm no relation, I have to say. And on behalf of the New York Times, it is my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the Climate Action Stage here at the Climate Innovation Center in Sharm el-Sheikh. I'm delighted that we've been able to squeeze this New York Times Climate Forward conversation between the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, and the New York Times climate reporter, Max Bearak, my colleague here. I'm going to invite now the former Prime Minister to make some opening remarks, after which he and Max will have about a 30-minute conversation. I believe there are some cards circulating, so if you have questions, please write them down, and they will miraculously appear, I believe, on Max's screen later on. So do pay attention to that. And ask questions via the cards. Former Prime Minister Johnson, please.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for my long-lost cousin, Stephen. Very, very, very good to see you this morning. Thank you for having me. Wonderful to be here in Sharm. An amazing privilege. I got up early this morning, as I'm sure many of you did, and I swam off the coral reefs. And I reflected that these are just some of the last great coral reefs in the world that have been able to withstand some of the worst effects of climate change. And when you consider that 90% of our coral reefs around the world face extinction, face destruction as a result of anthropogenic climate change, you can see how precious and how important it is what we are doing here in Sharm and what the world's leaders are doing today. I want to congratulate the Egyptian government on the organization of the summit, of the COP. Thank you, the New York Times, for giving me this platform. And I want to thank Climate Action and Kite Insights also for having me along. Well, listen, folks, it's incredible to me. I'm the spirit of Glasgow. That's what I'm doing. I'm the spirit of Glasgow, COP26. And it's incredible to think how much has changed since that last COP. And to be frank, how much damage has been done in just 1 year to our great common purpose of tackling man-made climate change. Because it was only a year ago, last November, we came together, we defied some of the gloomier media expectations. We showed what we could do when humanity really worked for an agreement. And thanks to the wisdom of the delegations, the UN negotiators, and I want to pay a particular tribute to my old friend Alok Sharma for what he did, we got some unexpectedly sizable, nationally determined contributions. And we agreed enough at Glasgow to take 4.5 billion gigatons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And since then, other NDCs have come in, as you know, and not least from India, to take us up to 6 billion gigatons in all. That's a bigger reduction than was delivered at Paris itself. And in that spirit of, that's at 6 billion gigatons we're taking out of the atmosphere, which would otherwise be swaddling our planet in a great eiderdown of heat. And we went further, if you remember, at Glasgow, and dozens of countries agreed to jettison the use of coal-fired power stations. As we were just hearing, I think, in the previous session, dozens of countries agreed to abandon the use of vehicles powered by internal combustion engines fueled by hydrocarbons. And we also came together to protect the forests that are so crucial for the very oxygenation of our planet. 145 countries agreed to stop or reverse deforestation by 2030. And I know the big issue here is cash. It's always about cash. And we didn't find enough cash to do everything that we need to do. But I think at least you saw at Glasgow that the developed world recognized the help that will be necessary to protect the climate vulnerable countries around the world, the small island nations in particular, and to help the developing world to adapt to a low carbon future. And if you want one statistic to remind you of the fundamental unfairness of imposing swinging costs on countries that did not cause this crisis because they did not pump the carbon out there 200 years ago, as we did in the UK, let me remind you that the whole of Africa, including the country we are in today, is still only responsible for 4% of global emissions. And that's why this has to be a joint global endeavor. And it was encouraging last year at COP in Glasgow to think that the developed world was seeing not just the moral obligations of investing in worldwide green solutions, but the huge commercial opportunity as well. And I came away from COP in Glasgow really believing for the first time in my life that anthropogenic climate change might be capable of a solution. And the clouds of despair momentarily parted for me to see a tiny gleam of hope. And I could see a way in which we really might be able to say that we could restrict the growth in temperatures in our planet to 1.5 degrees by the end of the century. And I think Glasgow was a high point for the struggle against climate change. Then, barely 3 months later, we had the moral and human catastrophe of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And there will be and are many victims of that grotesque miscalculation. But I believe that climate change, the fight against climate change, has been one of the most important collateral victims. Because the spike in oil and gas prices and the consequent global inflation, the hikes in the cost of fertilizer and food have had an impact here, in Egypt, have an impact everywhere. And they have led some of the naysayers to adopt a corrosive cynicism about net zero. And people have started to say, oh, we all went too far and too fast, and that we've been naive and utopian in our rush to move beyond hydrocarbons, that we've inflicted needless energy costs on our populations. And people have drawn the conclusion, some people, right? Not in this room. I'm exempting all of you from this charge. But there are people who've drawn the conclusion that the whole project of net zero needs to be delayed, mothballed, and put on ice. And, you know, for instance, we need to reopen coal-fired power stations and frack the hell out of the British countryside. And so I believe that here at Sharm is a moment when we really have to tackle this nonsense head on. And yes, of course, we do need to use hydrocarbons in the transitional period. That's obvious. And yes, in the UK, there is more that we can do with our own domestic resources. This is not, however, this is not the moment to abandon the campaign for net zero. This is not the moment to turn our backs on renewable technologies. One of my critics in the Daily Telegraph, my alma mater, the Daily Telegraph, actually is a former advisor of mine as it happens, he scoffed at wind power on the grounds that it was medieval technology. Medieval, he said. Well, I point out that burning oil is positively Paleolithic. And I believe that the critics of this agenda, of what we're trying to do, massively underestimate the ability of the human race to harness the natural world, to come up with innovative zero-carbon solutions. In the first half of this year alone, China has created 55 gigawatts of renewable energy. 55 gigawatts, that's more than half the total daily needs of the UK. America is actually going to decarbonize its grid fully by 2035. That's two of the greatest polluters on the planet, showing the can-do Promethean spirit that will get us out of this mess. And here in Egypt, they're soon going to be making the first zero-emission vehicles manufactured in Africa. So I say to you, this is the moment to put the electric throttle to the floor and build on all those programs that we got going in Glasgow. The Just Energy Transition Partnerships, for instance, with South Africa, to help them with a new low-carbon grid, and all the investment opportunities that will involve. The moment to help Indonesia, other countries, the giants of the future, to leapfrog hydrocarbons, to go green, and to create what I believe and I know will be an inexhaustible stream of high-wage, high-skill jobs. And jobs that have the extra and unbeatable satisfaction of knowing that you're not only helping to feed your family, but helping to save the planet at the same time. And that is the message at Sharm that we need to revive, and that is the campaign that we need to relaunch. And in the UK, of course, we're not only helping people with the cost of energy, we're making sure we can never again be so vulnerable to sudden gyrations in the price of gas. So we're putting in 50 gigawatts of wind power by 2030. We're building a new nuclear reactor every year rather than every 10 years. It was fantastic just now to talk to Rolls-Royce. We're making progress with their small modular reactors. And that is surely the best retort to those who want to chuck net zero. If we'd made these renewable investments earlier and in the UK, and if we hadn't lost our place, for instance, as the #1 civilian nuclear power in the world, which we were, who split the atom? The United Kingdom. Well, it was split first in the United States, New Zealander, I think, but never mind. We had the first civilian nuclear reactor. And we need to get that program underway and at speed. We need a nuclear reactor every year rather than every 10 years. If we'd done that, then the consequences of the gas price spike that we've seen would not have been so severe. And that's why I argue to all the cynics that we need to accelerate these programs now in the UK, because that is the way to build the long-term resilience and energy, the medium-term resilience and energy security we need. And listen, it's fantastic, I say, to be here in Sharm. I first came here, I think, in about 1987, and I stayed in a kind of tent on a cliff top. I don't know where. It's changed out of all recognition. But it was surely here or hereabouts, if my Bible studies don't deceive me, that Moses miraculously parted the waters of the Red Sea and led his people to the Promised Land. If it wasn't here, it was somewhere hereabouts. Well, what I can tell you, folks, is this time there will be no miracle escape from the inundations and other potentially disastrous consequences of climate change. Climate change, by the way, whose effects are all too real and visible, even in the UK. Temperatures in London this July reached 40 degrees, which is unprecedented and almost unbearable by United Kingdom standards, perhaps even contributing, who knows, to unexpected political turmoil that we saw in Westminster at that time. And yet, that is absolutely nothing, of course, compared to the fires, the droughts, the catastrophes, the damage to the natural world that we're now seeing, and which, of course, make the pharaonic plagues that afflicted Egypt look so trivial. We can see the scale of the problem, but we also have the rudiments, actually much more than the rudiments of the solution. We have in our hands the ability to fix this problem. The only way forward is by patient negotiation and compromise, and I wish all success to the negotiators now, and investment in the right technology. Investment in the right technology, both at home and abroad. And we've got to end the defeatism that I think has crept in since last year, end Putin's energy blackmail, keep up our campaign to end global dependence on hydrocarbons. And if we retain the spirit of creative optimism, Promethean creative optimism that we saw at Glasgow, then I think we can keep alive the hope of restricting the rise in temperatures to 1.5. Keep 1.5 alive. Thank you all very much for listening today. Thank you all and have a great COP. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Boris, for those
Thank
remarks.
you. Thank you.
And I'm afraid you were quite verbose. So we'll get to the urgent questions.
I had a lot of ground to cover.
In quick succession. Most urgent on my mind is a question that I'm hoping that you, as the spirit of Glasgow, as you put it, can speak to directly to the spirit of Sharm, which is Egypt's leaders, on the subject of Alaa Abdel Fattah, who is an Egyptian, British, an opinionated writer, much like yourself, who has been imprisoned for many years and is now not only on a hunger strike, but also on a water strike and is on the verge of death. And I know that members of your party have spoken about securing his release, but I'm wondering what you're doing here on this trip to help secure his release.
Well, thanks very much, Max. Well, first of all, let me say that on the subject of Mr. Al-Fattah, this is a very sad case, and as a UK dual national, as I'm sure members of our audience know, it's my strong belief that he should be released and that he should also have consular access. And that is a point that I've made several times with the Egyptian government. And I raised it most recently, actually, personally, with President Sisi just a few weeks ago when I was still Prime Minister. And we had a long conversation about it. And I, of course, continue to raise it. I make the point now. I think he should be let out and he should have consular access. President Sisi did seem to me to be open to discussion, and all I can say is that I've had experience. We have a very good relationship with Egypt, and I'm able to raise things very frankly with the Egyptians, and I did and will continue to do so because it's a great friendship and a partnership. President Sisi has been able to sort things out in the past. I have to say that I really hope, for the sake of Mr. Al-Fatah, for his family, who I think are having an absolutely terrible time, I hope that they can get on with it and that he can be released as fast as possible.
Thank you. I also noted in your remarks a great deal of optimism off the heels of Glasgow and optimism for what can happen in these coming 2 weeks. But at the same time, the conversation around loss and damage and the divide between rich and poor countries will dominate much of these weeks' discussions. And the UK and the United States and other rich nations are falling tens or more billions of dollars short on pledges that they've made. And so there's quite a bit of talk and perhaps a bit of progress, but at the same time, a huge gulf between what's been pledged and what's been done. And so I'm wondering, at what point does it just become imperative for Britain and the United States and others to simply just do more?
Yeah. Well, Max, I think as everybody knows, the budgetary pressures are massive right now, but that doesn't mean that we in the UK are not doing a huge amount. When I first became Prime Minister, I remember going to the UN and pledging £11.6 billion to tackle climate change. I think £3 billion for nature. This was the biggest effort the UK had ever made. And that pledge stands. We continue to give huge sums of assistance. I think it's important, though, to recognise that there is a gap. At COP26, we said the developed world would come up with $100 billion a year. We're way short of that at the moment. I think the most realistic thing I can say to you is I think the way forward is not endlessly. I mean, the taxpayer in the developed world is going to have to do some things, right? But it can't do everything. The taxpayer in the developed world cannot do everything, and certainly not right now. The best way forward are programs like the ESCOM deal with South Africa, the $8.5 billion deal to help the South Africans make their grid zero carbon, and to use government activity and intervention to trigger the private sector to come in. That is the real solution, I think, because taxpayers in the West, for overseas aid, they have tens, maybe hundreds of billions all in, but the markets have trillions and trillions that they can commit to green energy and to climate change solutions, and I really think we need to think of it that way.
Well, it's the markets, but it's also international lending institutions, right?
Yes.
That hold trillions of dollars and trillions of dollars in debt.
Yes.
From developed countries.
Yes. Yeah, and look, I think the MDBs need to think about what they're doing and to find ways of making sure that they're supporting the programs. And I think there is certainly a lot more that the Bretton Woods institutions could be doing. But believe me, the answer to this problem is going to be found in a partnership between an activist international community. I agree with you, but the private sector has got to do it. It's got in the end, it's got to be private sector investment that's going to fix this thing.
A huge amount of that movement will likely have to happen out of Washington, I imagine. And so you spoke a bit about the war and how that looms large over this conference. But I would imagine that tomorrow's elections in the United States also do. All indications point to a change of control of power in both the Senate and the Congress there toward a political disposition that is less keen on that kind of internationalism in addressing climate change. So I'm wondering if you kind of share that as a worry of the way that the United States might be able to engage on that level, if that is to be the case.
Yeah, listen, I want to say that the reason I'm here is because I am worried that the discussion about Ukraine, about what's happening there, is having all sorts of bad effects. It's making people anxious about net zero. It's about making people anxious about whether we can really do it. And the point I'm trying to get across to you today is that this is not the moment to go weak on net zero. This is the moment to double down on green technology, and the moment to double down on wind power and clean green solutions. That's the key point I want to get over. But the second thing is that this is not the moment to give in to Putin's energy blackmail. And I know this is not my analysis of what has taken place in Ukraine is not perhaps one that is shared by everybody around the world, least of all in Africa, Latin America, South Asia. There are plenty of people who disagree with me. But I think this is an absolutely Manichaean struggle between right and wrong. I really do. I think that what Putin has done is evil. He has decided to attack a completely innocent, sovereign, independent European country. And if he gets away with it, the consequences for the world will be utterly disastrous. And I think it's very, very important that the United States stays the course. And I want to pay tribute to the government of the United States because I think they've done an amazing job. $44 billion of support for Ukraine. I mean, the UK has given a lot. We were there at the beginning. We were able to help with, particularly with anti-tank missiles. But the United States has been absolutely crucial. And I hope that whatever happens in the midterms, there will be a continuation of that approach, and that America continues to support freedom and democracy on the continent of Europe. We always, in Europe, we always call on the Americans intermittently to rescue some great democratic cause, and having exhausted all the available alternatives, they then do the right thing, and they're doing it now, and I'm just praying that that's going to continue.
Just to stay on that for a second, after the midterms, it's widely expected that Donald Trump will re-announce his candidacy in the 2024 elections. You had one of the most cordial relationships with President Trump of many world leaders, but on potentially on Ukraine and on climate, I think have very different approaches. And I'm wondering if you could tell us more about conversations that you may have had with him on climate in particular, and how those went, and what the world might look forward to should the pendulum swing back in that direction.
Look, Max, you're not going to tempt me, brilliant that you are, to get in discussion of American politics. And I certainly wouldn't want to blight any particular American politician with any support. All I'm going to say is that I think it's incredibly important for the sake of the world that America stays with the program on climate change. I think what America is doing is crucial. It's absolutely crucial. I mean, the finance that you mentioned earlier on is vital, but also leading the world in helping countries to adopt clean technology. I think Joe Biden totally gets it, and that's the way we should be going. On Ukraine, I want America to remain as resolved as they've been so far. And I think by the way, I think they will be. I think the United States will stay in that position.
Well, switching to Britain then, I think you have spoken about how difficult of a period this is, and it's certainly a difficult period for people in Britain who are paying enormously high energy prices, and people all over the world who are facing even higher inflation and higher prices. How do we get through that period and not face and have this blackmail, as you describe it, not take root in public displeasure at having their livelihoods and checkbooks so fully interrupted by this?
That's exactly the question, and people are struggling and people are hurting, and they can feel the impact of the spike in energy prices every day. And as I said, it's not just in the UK; it's around the world. They're seeing the effects of that inflation. The answer is not to renew our addiction to hydrocarbons and to give in. The answer is and that's why I'm here. The answer is to accelerate the adoption of green solutions, and that's why we're going for 50 gigawatts of wind in the UK. I mean, that's a colossal amount. By the way, we only need about 100 gigawatts of electricity a day anyway. So 50 gigawatts is a huge amount of wind power to be building. 25 gigawatts of nuclear we're going for, as I said earlier. The solution is to move ahead with green solution with a green approach,
but of course,
and in the short term, of course, you have to abate the costs, the impact for people who are feeling it. And that's what the government is doing. And that's why I support what Rishi is doing, what the government is doing to help people in tough times.
But in the meantime, the UK, for instance, is issuing hundreds of new gas licenses. And, I mean, is that part of the short-term solution? Must that be done? Is it impossible to accelerate quickly enough towards renewables?
You need resilience in the short, medium term. You've just, I don't think there's any doubt about it. But what I'm trying to say to you is that you shouldn't use this. We should not be lurching back into an addiction or a dependency on hydrocarbons. And I think the oil and gas sector in the UK understand that.
Can the UK be doing more to kind of mirror, for instance, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US to incentivize a kind of global growth in these industries? Is that something that's feasible within the British system?
Yeah, look, I should say one thing, by the way, on gas in particular, which is clearly cleaner than other forms of hydrocarbon. One reason why you might want to consider using gas and making sure that you don't entirely close down your gas fields, and why it's sensible to keep them going, actually is you want carbon capture and storage, and you want to be able to you want a source for hydrogen as well. So hydrogen has got to be part of the solution. In that sense, hydrocarbons have if you go down the hydrogen route, hydrocarbons also have a long-term future. But on how to promote these things, it's the market. Offshore wind is now the cheapest form of energy in the UK, and it will get cheaper and cheaper. Nobody would have believed that possible 20 years ago. Stick with it and help other people to get with it.
I'd like to know a bit more about this private sector idea of yours, exactly what that would look like. I'm having trouble imagining that kind of level of partnership, maybe because it doesn't exist at the scale that it needs to be now. But how does that get promoted? Is it through tax incentives? Is it, what exactly do you have in mind when you say that?
What I have in mind is what we came up with at Carbis Bay in last year, and what that was in June of last year. And this was an initiative that we call the Build Back Better World initiative. And the idea is that the world's richest economies come together, the MDBs and others, and they make investments in projects that they think are going to be of value, but they bring in the private sector to invest as well. Because I've just told there's people who run green energy in the UK now, who run wind power, they're making, I'm embarrassed to say, huge sums of money. And it works, okay? This is a technology that works. And what we need to do is use the muscle of the governments, use the muscle of the MDBs to leverage in massive private sector investments. That is the way forward. These wind farms are not built by the state in the UK. If you can visualize what I'm talking about, they're not erected by government fiat. They're built by, with a system of called contracts for difference, whereby you agree to intervene at a certain price, and that sets the market, and the market comes in, and that's how these things get built. And it's an interaction between the state and the private sector that's been immensely productive.
I guess that may lead us into a question of the current government in Westminster. Do you have, I guess better than asking if you've got faith in them to live up to the pledges, are you going to be working with them specifically on climate?
I'm here as purely, I'm a foot soldier and spear carrier of the Conservative. I'm here in a purely supportive role, and to remind everybody remind the world of what we did at Glasgow, which I think was fantastic, and I'm genuinely proud of it. I think it was groundbreaking. I think the Glasgow Climate Pact was a great achievement, and I know that the present government also understands that and wants to take it forward.
I appreciate that you're here in a supportive role. I dare say myself and others imagine that it's also been a bit of an instigating role. And one of the questions or many of the questions from the audience that I'm getting are born out of curiosity of, were you worried when you initially heard that the current Prime Minister was not planning on attending it, especially after your hosting of this conference last year?
Look, the PM's here, and I'm glad he's here. He's made an outstanding speech the other day. I think he's on absolutely the right lines. I'm here basically to make the key point I've made to you, which is I think that the risk is that some people will go weak and wobbly on net zero. We can't have that. And also just to remind everybody of the spirit of Glasgow, which, as I say, I propose to incarnate before you today. Have you been to Glasgow?
I've never been to Glasgow.
Weren't you at Glasgow?
I wasn't there, but my ancestors are from Glasgow.
Is that right?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You look like you could be a kind of Glaswegian. Yeah, definitely.
Well, now I'm a mutt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a what?
I'm a mutt of many different
A mutt,
things.
yeah, me too. Yeah.
Well, I guess I want to ask you about, I guess more of kind of an emotional question or personal question about all of this. I mean, you've been expressing quite a bit of optimism, and it seems like the spirit of Glasgow to you is one of optimism. But I think there's still a great deal of doubt, especially among young people, that we're on the right track here. I think that you just have to look at the novels that are coming out today, or the TV shows and things like that. And a lot of that comes from just how far we are from actually living up to the pledges that are necessary. I mean, do you lie in bed at night looking at the ceiling, thinking we're failing here?
Yeah, we are at the current rate. We are. Be in no doubt that the disaster impends. And I've got this thing is real, and you can see the effects of it around the world. And we've got to do much more. I think one of the achievements that I thought was important at Glasgow was the declaration on forests, when the world agreed that 145 countries said that they were going to stop deforestation by 2030. But I've got to tell you, folks, in the last year, I don't see any sign of a reduction in the scale of the destruction in the forests of the world. It's absolutely catastrophic, and we need to work harder. I think that what's changing is that we probably now do have the technological fixes to stop man-made climate change, and to get to net zero. I think we can probably do that for fossil fuels. But if we're going to stop, but 20% of CO2 comes from deforestation. What are we going to do about that? That's a massive challenge. And I think you're right. I think young people really want us to go further and faster, and they are very impatient.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of young people, or just a lot of people generally, live in countries where electricity is still not available, and where industry has barely developed. And a lot of that is a result of centuries of colonization and then decades thereafter of economic domination. And I think that drives a lot of the frustration that less is being done than should be on loss and damage and on help in mitigating, and also in spurring some of these private sector partnerships that you're talking about, whether that's in renewable or perhaps even in fossil energy that these countries have not had the financing to be able to develop, for instance. And so, I guess I'd like you to speak just a bit more to what a country like Britain that has, that is home to so many energy companies and just, such a huge economic influence over so many parts of the world, can be doing to invest in, mitigation and adaptation and what some would call reparations.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think the first thing to accept is that the United Kingdom was one of the first, if not the first, industrialized nation, and we began, the great wisps of carbon came out of the factories in the mills and the foundries in the West Midlands, and 200 years ago we started it all. And there's no question that we're, per capita, people in the UK have put an awful lot of carbon into the atmosphere. But what we cannot do, I'm afraid, is make up for that with some kind of reparations. We simply do not have the financial resources, and no country could. What we can do is help with the technology that I think will fix the problem, and help to build these partnerships, like the JTP with South Africa. I do think it's a very encouraging development. You're going to see another one, I hope, with India, with Indonesia. This is the way forward. And I think the job of countries like mine is to act as the midwives, act as the conveners, to bring together the very considerable resources from the MDBs, and from ODA funding that we have, and I've mentioned the 11.6 billion that I announced as soon as I became Prime Minister. Put that together and then use it to encourage others to come in. And the idea of setting a strike price is, I think, a very fertile one. And it's one that I think it's triggered a huge amount of investment in the UK, particularly in the wind sector. And that's, I think, something I think we should be considering worldwide.
How do you react, to when people, maybe, let's say, you're a citizen of an African country or in India, and they hear you or John Kerry or other people, other leaders from the developed world that are speaking on climate, who say, well, we just can't afford it, and they are looking.
Sorry. Wait. Yeah. When you talk about reparations, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the bill is, or I think that whole concept is tough. Who devises the reparations, and let's look to the future. That's what I think we should be doing. Let's look at what we can do to trigger private sector investment and fix the problem now.
Sure. So in that sense, you're not convinced that reparations or a fund or something like that is there's anything there?
I think conceptually, I'd much rather look on what we can do to help countries go forward now. That's what we should be doing.
Okay. I think we will toss it out to the audience. I know we have a mic ready to pass around, so if you'd raise your hands, we can.
Hello, I'm Vineet from India. My question is, if you are not able to support financially, a country like India are investing around 100 billion a year. Our biggest challenge is the cost of funding, because India's rating is lower. So why not developed nation look at a mechanism where you do the credit enhancement and the first last stop, and that will increase the transition by 2x or 3x in India alone.
Look, I think that's a terrific idea. I'm in favor of the MDBs being much more creative about how they do this. But India, I think Prime Minister Narendra Modi has got some fantastic ideas, and what he's doing with the One World One Sun initiative is superb, and he's putting on a lot of solar power. I mean, you're able to put in more solar power in India than we are in the UK. For we have a lot now, but get the private sector in as well. You've got some fantastic guys working on that in India now.
Hi, good morning. My name is June Lewis. I'm co-chair of the International Decade for People of African Descent. Can we take the conversation about climate reparations a bit further? When you go, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. When you go back to London, can we have a discussion about that? Because the United Nations is coming to an end, and there's a permanent forum in Geneva in December. So I'd like to put climate reparations on the agenda and quote you, if you don't mind, because it is really a big topic, especially for Guyana, mangroves, Haiti, and lots of the Caribbean, definitely. Can we take the question forward when we get back?
Yes,
Thank you.
Of course, but I want to say that the best way to fix this is not to look backwards and to try to tot up some bill for loss and damage that the UK or other countries have done, but to try to look at what the UK can do to help to take countries forward and to give them help them to achieve the carbon reductions and the green technology that they need. And the opportunity in Africa is enormous because, as I said, right now Africa contributes only 4% of global emissions. Absolutely astonishing when you consider the size of the African population. There's an opportunity to leapfrog now for Africa, and for Africa to go, not to put in coal, not to use oil and gas. And there's a controversy now in many African countries about the way forward. I would say that our job is to try to help African countries find those green solutions and use government investment to trigger that.
Hi, I'm Annette from Mexico, and my question in this context, like in my country and in all Latin America countries that are focusing these type of economies, in your opinion and in your experience with United Kingdom making this transition to a green country or to adding this national plan with SDGs or with any type of affordable climate action solutions, which one do you think is the most deal that all these countries that have the economy based on fossil resources on in all these type of pollution actions or economy can help so these countries can make the transition not only in the private sector, only in the public sector?
Yes, I think you can do it, and you can do it surprisingly fast. That's the point I would make to you. When I was a kid, I think in 1990, 70% of UK energy, of UK electricity, I should say, came from coal. 70%. Do you know what it is now? It's now 1% or less. And maybe there's a controversy about one mine that might be necessary for metallurgical purposes. But the reduction in UK dependency on coal has been absolutely phenomenal, and countries can achieve it, and they can do it very, very fast when they try. So that's why I'm so encouraged by what the South Africans are doing with their ESCOM deal, and that I think is the way forward.
Boris, over here. David.
Yes, David Shuckers from the BBC.
Ex-BBC, now
Oh, right.
freelance.
I'm so sorry.
Sorry to drag the Westminster of drama to the Egyptian desert, but you announced you were coming here when Rishi Sunak had said he wouldn't. I mean, to what extent were you worried that the British Prime Minister would not come to COP27?
I'm here as a supportive spear carrier to swell a chorus, but to get over the key point for me, which is that the Glasgow Climate Pact was a very, very important moment, and I want to see that legacy taken forward. And I really think that it's crucial that the steering wheel is yanked back a bit towards tackling climate change in favor of clean, green solutions by way of achieving net zero. So that's what I'm here to do. And frankly, the microcosmographica of British politics they will not remove an ounce of carbon from the atmosphere. I don't think anybody here really cares about that. Shakas, with great respect and love and admiration for you, but nobody gives a monkey.
Is the Prime Minister wrong to push for more oil and gas from the North Sea?
Look, as I said earlier, I think that it's right in the short term to recognise that we've got a transition period. Everybody can see that. But why I'm here is to get over the message that that doesn't mean that we're just going to drift back into dependency on hydrocarbons. We're going to make ourselves vulnerable again in the way that we were. I mean, that was the tragedy of the last 9 months. After the euphoria, or the quasi-euphoria of Glasgow, we allowed ourselves to believe that we had a solution, and then we showed that we immediately saw the vulnerability of the world to spikes in the price of oil and gas. And that really shook people. And it's crucial now that we don't learn the wrong lessons. Okay, folks, how are we doing? We've got lots more questions here, Max. How do you feel? How do you feel about this?
I think we've got time for one last question.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Me now? Hi, my name is Raul. I'm from Brazil. I'm part of Climate Clock, the tower clock that is here outside. I invite everyone to take a look. And I think it's very interesting to have someone like you saying, take a look at the future, when the journalist asks about colonization, when we just not recognize this history. And you have met a few times with Bolsonaro, that has been one of the most violent presidents we have ever had in history of Brazil. So I'd like to understand how, again, funding comes from colonial countries, how, again, funding is going to save Africa, and you keep talking about Africa as a continent, not recognizing the amount of nations that we have here in Latin America, and always in this generalized perception. I would like to understand how, again, us from the global south, us have to going back to the global north to look for funding for solutions that we have with our indigenous communities, with our local communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, can I just say that I agree totally about Brazil. Brazil is of huge importance, and the Amazon forest alone, I think, generates about 20% of the oxygen in the atmosphere. So what happens in Brazil matters deeply for us all. And I'm encouraged, if I'm correct in what I read, that there's going to be a move against deforestation now in Brazil. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, but that's great news. And that's why it was so important at Glasgow, to get back to my theme, that we agreed $1.5 billion to tackle deforestation, and I believe a further on your point about indigenous peoples, and you're right in what you say about their role as the custodians of those great natural resources. $2 billion was agreed at Glasgow to help indigenous peoples around the world. What I'm saying to you today, and what I'm saying to everybody, is don't give up on what we achieved at Glasgow. Have it etched. I'm worried about the slightly blank look on some of your faces. These numbers look unfamiliar to you. This is what we agreed. I'm very, very concerned that we deliver it. And I think that the achievement was very considerable, or the potential achievement was massive, but it's all now about delivery. And that's why world leaders here in Sharm are absolutely, in my view, obliged to get on and do it. And my role is simply to encourage, applaud, and if necessary, act as what's the word I want? A voice from the wings to stimulate them and encourage them and applaud them as they get on. But let's hope that they achieve something here at Sharm, something considerable for the world. And in the meantime, thank you all very, very much, because I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you all very much. Thank you.